Thank you, Arunas. I think it's become somewhat customary that we have a presentation about Saginaw Bay and walleye and perch in Saginaw Bay at these lakes meetings because of the prominence of Saginaw Bay to Lake Huron, not just in terms of a physical feature, but the importance of the fisheries and the fish community there. And this particular year, what I'll try to do is to give you something of an update on the status of yellow perch and walleye, but also to try to frame it in the context of the management changes that have recently been implemented there and some of the assessment that has been in support of that. So I think it was a year ago we gave something of a presentation about the range of management options that were being contemplated. And that was really all settled upon and implemented this past fall. But if you're not familiar with that, I'll lead you down to what was decided. And what we're really working towards, at least within the Michigan DNR, is to become more responsive to changes in these fisheries and these fish populations, and to annually tailor the management to the needs of those fisheries, and building on, of course, the modeling and the assessment behind that. So to a certain degree, we're kind of following the model, if you will, of Lake Erie with the Walleye Task Group and the allocation that goes on there, although we're not confronted necessarily with an allocation situation in Saginaw Bay, but we're trying to be a little more nimble in the management and to use this occasion to roll out any future management changes. So, in some respects, this is kind of a placeholder for what we expect to be doing each year. So some of these slides will look familiar to you, but the 2015 value should be the new one. This is the age 0 trawl catch rate in our annual September assessment. And you can see where things all began to change in terms of reproductive success there around 2003 with the disappearance of alewives from Lake Huron. And the connection is that alewives are a formidable predator and competitor in newly hatched Burkett fry. And so in their absence, reproductive success soared. And we really knew that by virtue of being able to distinguish hatchery fish, because we were still stocking at that time, and that's what those percentages are based on the oxytetracycline marking that we did with our hatchery fry. They were stocked as fingerlings, and we could see that it was principally wild fish that was driving this sudden surge in abundance of age 0 or young of year walleye. And we discontinued stocking in 2006, so 0% from then on. And we met our recovery targets in 2009, declared recovery, and you can see that reproductive success has held up every year since. The abundance of adult walleye best indicated in our concurrent gillnet assessment that takes place at the same time as the trawling survey. So this is all ages, which really is about age 1, they recruit to this gear on up, and you can see the how the abundance of walleyes of all ages expanded. And that line there is the angler catch rate as estimated by our creel survey, where the fishery really responded to the increase in walleye. And I'll have a targeted catch rate that I'll show you later, but this is spread across all the fishermen in the bay, and it's not everybody is targeting walleyes. Perch is also important, and there's some smallmouth bass fishing and other species going on there. So in 2015, we've seen some indication of contraction of that walleye, of the walleye population, and this is coming concurrent with these management changes. And so there's a little bit of concern there, but I'll show you some other metrics that really drove the motivation for the management changes in terms of what's taking place with the overall fish community. This is the estimate of age 2 and older walleyes from our catch at age model, and you can see here how it's reflecting a decline in 2015, but still relatively abundant, and these are almost entirely wild fish now. So that's the same slide on the bottom that I just showed you, and on top is what Lake Erie has done as indicated by their catch at age model. So that's also age 2 and older walleye over time. And what I think maybe is taking place is if you look at where walleye first really recovered there in the early 1980s in Lake Erie, they eventually came back down to a more intermediate rate over time, excepting for, of course, for the strong 2003 year class. Maybe that same phenomenon is taking place in Saginaw Bay. So what I'm talking about are these periods here. Our most recent period is probably the same there, where they are released from some sort of constraint, reproductive success soars, abundance soars, but then eventually the density effects of the stock recruitment relationship kicks in and recruitment lessens and they come down to a more sustainable period. So maybe that's what's taking place in Saginaw Bay with walleye. This is the targeted catch rate that I spoke of. The 0.4 walleye per hour is kind of a reference point for Lake Erie that the managers there want to stay around or better than, and you can see where we are in Saginaw Bay is right at that point. So in spite of that contraction, our angler targeted catch rate is very good in Saginaw Bay. Now, yellow perch, by contrast, we have seen the same sort of explosion in reproductive success as indicated by the yellow portion of these bars. That is the trawl catch rate of age 0 or young of year yellow perch, while the I guess it's a purple color is yearling and older yellow perch. And you can see back in the day we had abundant adult and older, or yearling and older yellow perch in response to whatever year classes were produced, as indicated by the yellow bars. But that all changed here in 2003. We have very good reproductive success. It was not a problem with reproduction, but we don't see them when we come back then the following year looking for yearling yellow perch. We see very few of them. So there's a survival problem, or more specifically a mortality problem, sometime between age 0 and age 1 when it comes to yellow perch. This is the diet of walleyes, which are arguably the principal predator in Saginaw Bay. And we can see from the yellow portion that yellow perch is now figuratively much more prominently in the diet of walleye than they did previously. Previously, the diet was dominated by alewives or gizzard shad, so croupiers in general, and they probably provided a buffer on yellow perch so that yellow perch could survive better. But in the absence of alewives now, we see that the diet has shifted. Now, there's still some utilization of gizzard shad, but that hasn't really provided the relief necessary to yellow perch. And there you look in 2015, and almost the entire diet, at least at the time of year that we're looking at it, in the late summer, early fall, is almost entirely yellow perch, and particularly juvenile yellow perch. So here, it's not just perch that we're concerned about. This is the biomass of our forage index. So it's the species you see listed on the bottom there, which include age 0 yellow perch, but a lot of other things. And then you can see how it has trended downward in recent years as undoubtedly as a result of increased predation pressure from the expanding and recovered walleye population. In fact, if we overlay the biomass of walleye in the trawls, and really they're underrepresented, so the true biomass is greater probably in terms of pounds per acre, we can see that in recent years, the abundance of the biomass of walleye as a predator is as great as what we're measuring for the forage index. Or in the case of, I think, 2014, the predator biomass even exceeded that. So this was a strong motivation for the fishery managers to really bring about some change here to try to restore some balance between predator and prey in the bay, because this is really not a sustainable relationship in the long term. This is the findings of a cormorant diet study that was taking place in 2013 and 2014. So Saginaw Bay is one of the few places where cormorants have not previously been managed, and the yellow portion is yellow perch. And so as has been typical of these kind of diet studies, we discover that cormorants are principally eating, in this case, gobies and other things. But in the spring and then sometimes in the late summer, we see that yellow perch are a prominent part of their diet. And in the case of Saginaw Bay, when these numbers were represented in terms of pounds eaten and spread across the number of days that they're feeding and the number of cormorants out there, the consumption of yellow perch by cormorants amounted to as much as a third as much as what walleye are eating. So clearly walleye are the principal predators, but cormorants are another predator that are having an impact on yellow perch. So the relevance of this is the managers begin to think through about what can be done to try to promote yellow perch survival in the bay. These are the things that are getting looked at. And I might mention too that the effects of that failure to survive from age 0 to age 1 for yellow perch has really compromised the qualities of our fisheries. They're exploited both recreationally and commercially in the Saginaw Bay. And for all practical purposes, those fisheries have collapsed. And the importance of this is that yellow perch are really the single most sought after species in Saginaw Bay, even in spite of the walleye recovery. The fishery participation and effort really trends as the yellow perch do. So in the absence of a quality yellow perch fishery, we've actually seen effort go down in Saginaw Bay in spite of being one of arguably the best walleye fisheries in North America right now. So while the yellow perch fishermen aren't always as vocal maybe as some of the other segments of our constituents, it's really an important feature to that overall fishery. So when you think of Saginaw Bay, think of yellow perch. So in regards to walleye management options, this is the outcome of a decision analysis I think Arunas mentioned earlier. And the way this works was we used a simulation model to populate this table of this is really an index of relative performance. This isn't actually the number of walleyes that would be harvested under these different management scenarios. But the management scenarios is simply an intensity of fishing exploitation in the recreational fishery. And so 1.0 represented no change, and then these were really increased levels of exploitation. What the managers wanted to know was, how intensively can this population be fished without crossing certain thresholds of sustainability? And that was defined as the first threshold as a 20%, not falling below 20% of the spawning stock biomass, 20% of the unfished rate. And then the other is a growth rate index that we used to help define when we had achieved recovery status for walleye. And the importance of growth rate is really a surrogate for density relative to carrying capacity. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then in the decision analysis, you're accounting for various combinations of uncertainty at the top, certain things that we didn't know about what might happen in the future, and that was what lives we're going to do, and then the relative magnitude of a bykill in the state licensed commercial fishery. There's a whole other talk behind this table, but what is important is that once we did this, we just calculated a weighted average, and then looked for the maximum value, and then that led across to what the maximum fishing mortality that would be sustainable with. And that was really a 50% increase. So this is just one tool to help give the managers some confidence of how far they might go then with their management changes in order to achieve better utilization of the walleye population. That's one goal. And then, of course, maybe to also provide some relief for yellow perch. I might add that this effort was really led by Ty Grischke and then also Jim Baker from the Southern Lake Huron Management Unit with support from the research section in the Michigan DNR. And it was done in consultation with some of the stakeholders and also through the tech committee. So this is several different management options were considered, but this is really what resulted and was implemented this past October. And for walleye, the challenge, of course, then is, okay, we've got this increased fishing mortality that can be sustained. What does that really mean in terms of size limits and bag limits? That's a little harder to do. But what the group settled upon was to decrease the minimum length limit from 15 inches down to 13 inches, so availing 2 more inches of size class to harvest in the recreational fishery, and increasing the daily possession limit from 5, which is a statewide default regulation, up to 8. And this kind of approach has been utilized on Lake Erie before. So this is a substantial liberalization for walleye to try to get better utilization within the recreational fishery. But then on the yellow perch side of things, that same change translates right through there as something that's intended to benefit yellow perch by reducing, hopefully, the numbers of walleye, some in the form of increased recreational harvest, and thereby reducing yellow perch mortality. The other is to commence some cormorant reductions in the bay. It's still being negotiated as to exactly how big of a reduction that might take place, but to utilize the provisions of the Public Resource Deprivation Order from the Fish and Wildlife Service to do that, and try to, in concert with these reductions of walleye, pairing that up with whatever can be realized from cormorant reductions and try to promote better survival. Also, reduction in commercial harvest. One of the commercial fishers that in inner Saginaw Bay had been relocated for in trade, really, for some effort for another fishing opportunity outside of Saginaw Bay. The recreational bag limit for perch was reduced from 50 per day down to 25. And then there's also the Cisco reintroduction strategy that Steve Leonard talked about in terms of trying to restore Cisco to Saginaw Bay, where historically they were very important. It was probably Cisco before alewives that provided that same predation buffer in terms of maybe not the adults so much, but their abundant progeny and that used the bay for nursery grounds. So that's more of a long-term experimental strategy, but it's part of the suite of what's being laid out here to try to bring about some improved survival for yellow perch. So you can see from this, the managers are trying to work every lever they have to bring about improvement in the yellow perch population for both the recreational and the commercial fisheries. So let me shift gears now back to some of the assessment. This is our mean length at age for sexes combined age 3 walleyes in Saginaw Bay. We're just picking age 3 as sort of a convenient indicator here. You could do this with other ages as well. And the idea behind tracking this is that growth rate being density dependent is sort of a surrogate for abundance. And it's particularly useful because growth rate's going to be a function really of the available prey base and the habitat. So you can kind of think about this in terms of carrying capacity. When goals were first set for the recovery of walleye in Saginaw Bay, we didn't really know what the modern day prey base and habitat could support. So we let the fish tell us in terms of their growth rate. So the idea here is this is the state average rate that's been defined for walleyes in Michigan for collection around August and September. And a target was established by our managers that we wanted that growth rate to be 110%. And the actual language was once we had 3 out of 5 consecutive years that were at or below that rate, we'd declare recovery. And that's what happened in 2009. So you can see before that, the growth rate was extremely high or fast. So they were growing very well, suggesting that there was more capacity for walleyes than what was actually out there. And then when reproductive success increased and recruitment increased, that growth rate came down. So this index worked really well for us. This is just one of the metrics that we've been looking at with the managers. And there you can see where it's at in 2015. So even though the population has come down some, this says we're still within the zone of recovery. This is the percent of the unfished spawning stock biomass as indicated by the catch at age model, and you can see where we are in 2015. The red line there is the 20% of the unfished rate, so in theory we don't want to go below that. And in 2014 at least, which is the most recent year that we can estimate from the model, we're right at that level. So this is some concern in that we're already kind of at the edge, and yet we're going to liberalize, and well, we may well cross that. And so what the managers may then decide in next year when somebody's up here giving this presentation, we may rein this back in some. It's going to probably take 3 or 4 years of adjustments until we settle into the right niche in terms of matching the management with what the trends are in the population and the fishery. And then maybe at that point it'll just be a matter of tweaks, or maybe every 3 years or something like that, a change will be implemented. But this is one of the things that we're watching for. So what about other metrics of sustainability? This is the exploitation rate in the recreational fishery. It's estimated 2 ways. One is from the catch at age model, that's the blue line, and then the other is from our tag returns being plugged into the Brownie model, and that's the green line there. So whether you look at this, either one, it's ranging between about 10% to about maybe 16%, which is highly sustainable for a healthy walleye population experiencing regular recruitment. So this is just another way of looking at sustainability. It says we're pretty good. Then this is total annual survival as estimated by our catch at age model for 3 different age groups. So the blue line there is age 2s, and we can see over time that hasn't changed very much, and that's Not surprising, because a lot of times the H2s aren't fully recruited to the fisheries. And then if you look at the other older age groups, you can see that they have a lower survival rate, probably for reflecting, of course, the fishing mortality or exploitation. It's actually declined some in recent years, and suggested that the fishery probably expanded a little bit faster even than the population did. But on the whole there, you can see for these exploited age groups, it's right around maybe 63, 65%. So the difference between that and 1 is your total annual mortality rate, suggesting that mortality rate's right around between 30 and 40%, and that's pretty sustainable for a healthy fish population. So we're encouraged by this. This is one of the other metrics that we'll be watching. So in the future, this is a kind of a timeline for what we think our system will be, where we will start with our spring tagging work, which is right about now. In fact, we have crews out applying jaw tags to walleyes. Then we have our fall fishery independent survey, the trawling and the gill netting. Then we'll use the winter to age specimens and do the analysis and the model updates. All the while, we'll have creel survey and commercial reporting taking place. And then there'll be an opportunity for consultation with stakeholders. Then the managers will meet and settle upon whether or not there's going to be any changes for the coming year. And then we'll use this opportunity at the Lakes meeting to announce what those will be. And then, in theory, the regulation changes would go in on the heels of that. And we're utilizing that same 1-800 call-in number to be able to adjust regulation changes without having to wait for a new print of the guidebook, just as they do on Lake Erie, so we can be more responsive. And so this is kind of what we're shooting for. We'll see how well we do. It may take a little time to perfect that. You probably can't read all that, and the point isn't really that you would read these individual lines. This is just to show sort of what the dashboard might be of all the different kinds of indicators and metrics that we have to look at. And I've only shown you a few here today in the actual graphs, but there's a lot more available out there. And so the challenge going forward is it enough just to look at spawning stock biomass and growth rate of H3, or do we need to look at other things to help really indicate when changes are needed to the management? And we have lots to look at, and we don't yet know exactly how we'll weight each of these. Some of these are more important, or we have more confidence in them than others. Then there's also metrics that aren't specifically related to walleye, but are of importance, such as the forage fish index and how that's trending, and the abundance of yellow perch. And then we have forecasting tools in the form of our simulation models, so we can also look forward as well as to the catch and age model, which tells us in theory, what's currently going on. So this is some of the work that we have yet to do, is to really chew this over and think about how we want to construct a decision framework or criteria in the future. And lots of people have contributed to this, and these are just some of them here. And I'll take questions if there's time.